There is something almost irresistible about a conspiracy theory. A familiar story is placed on a table, every scene is turned over, and suddenly the empty spaces begin to look more important than the scenes themselves. A glance becomes evidence, a coincidence becomes a plan. A character who arrived at exactly the right moment becomes a hidden hand moving pieces across a board that nobody else can see. Vinland Saga is especially fertile ground for this kind of thinking. It is a story built from history, legend, memory, exaggeration, and silence. Some of its characters really lived, although not necessarily in the form we meet them. Some of its events echo the Old Norse sagas, while others are inventions designed to connect one moral argument to another. Its world contains political schemes that are openly admitted, schemes that are only implied, and strange moments that seem to brush against the supernatural before quietly returning to the cold ground of history. So tonight, we are going to wander through some of the wildest conspiracy theories surrounding Vinland Saga. Some of these theories have circulated among fans for years. Others grow naturally from unanswered questions, historical gaps, and suspicious patterns in the story. A few are deliberately extreme. They are the sort of ideas that sound ridiculous when first spoken aloud, but become strangely difficult to dismiss once all the pieces are laid beside one another. None of these theories should be confused with confirmed canon. That distinction matters. Vinland Saga is powerful precisely because it rarely needs a secret answer to explain human behavior. Greed, fear, love, pride, and desperation are often enough, yet theories can still reveal something useful. Even when a theory is wrong, it can show us what a scene is designed to make us feel, what a character refuses to say, or how carefully Makoto Yukimura constructed the parallels running beneath Thorfinn's journey. This discussion contains spoilers from across the entire story. We will move far beyond the events adapted in the first 2 seasons of the anime, through the Eastern Journey, the struggle over the Jomsvikings, and the expedition to Vinland itself. Theories concerning the final direction of Thorfinn's dream will also appear. With that warning given, let us begin where nearly every great mystery in Vinland Saga begins, with Thor's, Floki, and a death that may have been far more politically important than it first appeared. The accepted version of events is straightforward. Thor's deserted the Jomsvikings, disappeared into Iceland, and built a quiet life with Helga and their children. Years later, Floki arrived carrying an order that forced him back into military service. The order was a trap. Floki had already hired Askeladd to kill Thors before Thors could reach the battlefield. The ambush succeeded. Thors died protecting his son and his village companions, and Thorfinn's life was dragged into the world of violence his father had tried to escape. But the first conspiracy theory claims that Floki did not have Thors killed merely because he was a deserter. Desertion was the excuse. The real reason was succession. To understand the theory, we have to remember what Thors represented inside the Jomsvikings. He was not simply another skilled fighter. He was called the Troll of Jom, a warrior so formidable that even Thorkel remembered him with admiration. He had married Helga, the daughter of the Jomsviking leader Sigvaldi. That marriage placed him close to the ruling family. He possessed strength, reputation, blood connections through his wife, and perhaps most dangerously, the ability to inspire loyalty without demanding it. Floki, by contrast, is a man whose power depends on structure. He understands rank, orders, inheritance, and manipulation. He is effective because institutions give him hands longer than his own. A figure like Thors is therefore uniquely threatening to him. Thors does not need a title in order to command respect. If he returned to Jomsborg willingly or unwillingly, people might look at him and see the natural leader of the Jomsvikings. They might even see a better future for the organization, one no longer controlled by men such as Floki. The theory proposes that Floki had been thinking about the succession of Jomsborg long before the main story made that struggle visible. He knew that Sigvaldi could not rule forever. He knew that family connections would matter. He knew that Thors had disappeared, but he could never know whether the famous warrior might one day come back. More importantly, he could not know whether someone else might find Thors and invite him back at the worst possible moment. From this perspective, the summons to war becomes remarkably convenient. Floki did not simply discover Thors by chance and decide to punish him. He waited until the political environment gave him perfect cover. War allowed him to place Thors on a ship, separate him from Iceland, direct him toward a predictable route, and hire outsiders to do the killing. If the plan succeeded, the death would look like one more loss at sea or one more casualty of Viking conflict. Floki's own hands would remain clean in the eyes of the Jomsvikings. Why use Askeladd rather than loyal Jomsviking soldiers? Because loyal soldiers might hesitate. Some might recognize Thors, some might remember his old reputation, others might question why such a valuable warrior had to die before reaching the battlefield. Askeladd's band, however, could be purchased. They were disposable, deniable, and distant from Jomsborg's internal politics. There is another suspicious detail. Floki did not merely want Thors defeated, he wanted him removed before he re-entered the military world. If desertion were the only crime, Thors could have been arrested, publicly punished, or forced to serve. A public execution might even have reinforced discipline, but a public return would also allow people to see him. It would allow old comrades to remember what he was. It would allow Thorkel, Sigvaldi, and others to ask questions. Assassination prevented the return itself. The theory becomes even darker when Balder enters the story. Floki's later obsession with placing his grandson at the head of the Jomsvikings reveals how deeply he cares about controlling succession. Once we see what he is willing to do for Balder, it becomes easier to imagine that he considered Thors an obstacle years earlier. Thors was connected to the ruling line through Helga. Thorfinn was therefore also connected to it. Even if neither father nor son wanted authority, their existence complicated Floki's plans. This leads to the wildest version of the theory. Floki was not only eliminating Thors, he was attempting to erase an entire rival branch of Jomsviking legitimacy. Thor's death would remove the obvious rival. Thorfinn, still a child, was supposed to be nowhere near the ambush. Yet once he appeared, Askeladd's decision to keep him alive created a problem that Floki may not initially have known about. Years later, Thorfinn's identity and connection to Thors become politically explosive. The boy Floki accidentally allowed to survive eventually returns to Jomsborg and stands at the center of the organization's fate. That is almost too perfect as poetic justice. Floki tries to manage history by removing a man. Instead, he creates the very person who will destroy the future he planned. There are reasons to doubt this conspiracy. Floki's hatred may genuinely have been personal and institutional rather than part of a decades-long succession plot. Thors embarrassed the Jomsvikings by deserting, and an authoritarian organization cannot easily tolerate a legendary member walking away. Floki may also have acted because he feared what Thors knew, or simply because he regarded desertion as betrayal. The story never gives us a hidden document showing that Thors was formerly considered an heir. Still, conspiracy theories rarely survive because every detail is confirmed. They survive because motives overlap. Floki could have hated Thors as a deserter, feared him as a rival, and removed him for the sake of future succession all at once. Human beings seldom act for only one reason, especially men who have spent their lives in political organizations. This theory changes the opening of Vinland Saga. Thor's death is no longer an isolated tragedy arranged by a bitter officer. It becomes the first strike in a political war that will not fully reveal itself until Thorfinn is grown. The child hiding on the ship is unknowingly carrying a claim that powerful men would kill to control. And Thors, who wants nothing from Jomsborg, may be the most dangerous candidate precisely because he cannot be bought by the promise of ruling it. The next theory begins in the same ambush but turns its attention toward Askeladd. It claims that Askeladd never truly wanted to kill Thors. His real intention was to recruit him. On the surface, this idea seems easy to dismiss. Askeladd accepted money to perform a job. He arranged an ambush and ultimately ordered the arrows that killed Thors. Whatever admiration he developed during the encounter, the result remains the same. Yet the duel between them contains a strange moment. After Thors defeats him, Askeladd asks him to become the leader of his band. It can be interpreted as a joke, a test, or a brief expression of respect. But what if it was sincere? Askeladd spends most of his life surrounded by men he considers crude, predictable, and spiritually small. He leads them because they are useful. He jokes with them, eats with them, and occasionally protects them, but he does not share himself with them. His private loyalty belongs to Wales, to the memory of his mother, and to the story of Artorias. He is waiting for a great leader while pretending he no longer believes such a person will come. Then Thors appears. Thors is everything Askeladd's world says should not exist. He is overwhelmingly strong, yet unwilling to dominate. He defeats armed men without killing them. He understands immediately how Askeladd thinks. He possesses the calm authority of the ideal king Askeladd has been imagining since childhood, but he refuses kingship, wealth, and fame. The theory suggests that the duel functions as an unplanned interview. Askeladd begins by measuring Thors as a target. By the end, he is measuring him as a possible leader. When he asks Thors to take command, he may be offering him the one thing Askeladd has never offered another person: access to his hidden purpose. Imagine the possibilities from Askeladd's point of view. A man like Thors could transform the band. He could become the military force Askeladd needs to protect Wales. He could command respect among Danes while remaining independent from Danish greed. He might even become a new Artorias, a warrior who possesses power but has rejected the values of conquest. The problem is that Thors refuses. If Askeladd's offer is sincere, the refusal places him in an impossible position. He still has a contract. His men are watching. Floki may eventually learn whether the target survived. Askeladd cannot simply allow Thors to sail away unless he is prepared to abandon his own reputation and expose himself to retaliation. More subtly, Thors' refusal also confirms that he cannot be used. He will not become a weapon for Wales, for Askeladd, or for anyone else. This gives the final Ero Vali a tragic double meaning. Askeladd kills the man he was searching for because the world he has chosen makes it impossible for him to follow that man. He recognizes the true king, and then proves he is not yet capable of serving him. There is an even wilder extension. Some fans have wondered whether Askeladd deliberately structured the ambush to give Thors a chance to impress and perhaps replace him. He knew Thors' reputation. He could have used arrows immediately, yet allowed the confrontation to unfold. He could have overwhelmed the smaller group without ceremony, yet accepted a duel. Perhaps some part of him wanted Thors to defeat him in front of the band so thoroughly that the men would naturally transfer their loyalty. If that was the unconscious plan, it almost worked. Askeladd's warriors are stunned by Thors. They witness a level of strength beyond their experience. When Askeladd offers leadership, the suggestion does not feel entirely absurd. Had Thors accepted, many of them might have followed. But Thors understands something Askeladd does not. Taking leadership of violent men in order to direct them toward a supposedly noble purpose still means accepting violence as the foundation of authority. Thors cannot build peace by inheriting Askeladd's band. His refusal is not a failure to recognize opportunity. It is the final proof that he has truly left the warrior's world. The evidence against this theory is obvious. Askeladd is a gifted improviser. His offer may have been nothing more than admiration spoken in the moment. He might have known Thors would refuse. He may even have used the question to distract everyone while preparing the next move. There is no need to invent a secret recruitment plan when Askeladd's curiosity and theatrical personality explain the exchange perfectly well. Yet the theory remains compelling because Askeladd spends the rest of the story searching for what he briefly found in Thors. He later guides Canute toward kingship. He teaches Thorfinn through cruelty and contradiction. He sacrifices himself for a political future he will never see. In each case, he is trying to produce or protect the kind of leader Thors already was. Perhaps Askeladd's tragedy began not when he killed Thors, but one moment earlier, when he offered to follow him and heard no. From there we arrive at a theory that is even more unsettling. Askeladd deliberately kept Thorfinn alive because he decided to raise Thor's successor. Canon gives us practical explanations for Thorfinn's survival. Askeladd is amused by him. The boy is too small to be a serious threat. He can earn his meals and eventually becomes useful in battle. Askeladd also has no particular reason to kill a child who followed the ship without permission. Over time, their relationship develops into something complicated, hateful, and almost familial. The conspiracy version argues that this relationship was not an accident. The moment Askeladd saw Thorfinn's rage, he understood exactly what he could make from it. Askeladd had just watched Thors demonstrate a form of strength he could not fully understand. He had also watched Thors die for his son. Thorfinn was therefore not merely a furious child. He was the final living piece of the man Askeladd had admired. Keeping him close allowed Askeladd to study what Thors had left behind. More importantly, Thorfinn gave Askeladd a long-term experiment. Could the son of a true warrior be shaped by the world of violence and still somehow rediscover his father's path? Could suffering burn away childish fantasy and produce something stronger than ordinary Viking ambition? Or would the boy simply become another killer? The harshness of Askeladd's treatment can be read as indifference, but conspiracy thinking turns it into design. He never gives Thorfinn the duel he wants on fair emotional terms. He makes him work for each opportunity. He sends him into dangerous situations. He humiliates him, provokes him, and repeatedly demonstrates that rage makes him predictable. It is a brutal education in the limits of revenge. Askeladd could have killed Thorfinn at almost any time. He could also have abandoned him somewhere far from the band. Instead, he allows the boy to remain for years. He lets Thorfinn become strong enough to threaten him. That is strange behavior for a cautious man unless some part of him wants to see what Thorfinn becomes. The theory points toward Askeladd's final moments. When Thorfinn rushes toward him after the assassination of King Sweyn, Askeladd does not apologize. He does not offer comfort. Instead, he tells Thorfinn to go beyond the world Thor's reached, to become a true warrior and discover what he should do with his life. It is the closest thing Askeladd gives him to a final lesson. What if that lesson was the purpose all along? Perhaps Askeladd understood that Thorfinn's revenge could never be completed in the way the boy imagined. If Thorfinn killed him, the boy would remain trapped inside the warrior culture that created both of them. If someone else took Askeladd's life, Thorfinn would be forced to confront the emptiness beneath his goal. The loss of revenge might break him, but it might also free him. The wild version of the theory claims that Askeladd intentionally arranged his own death where Thorfinn could witness it, knowing that the shock would destroy the identity built around vengeance. He did not merely save Canute and Wales, he performed the final step in Thorfinn's education. This is difficult to accept literally. Askeladd's crisis with King Sweyn develops rapidly. He chooses his course because Wales and Canute are in immediate danger. There is no evidence that Thorfinn's psychological development is his primary concern, yet Askeladd is capable of holding several objectives at once. In his final moments, he sees Canute, Wales, and Thorfinn together. He uses one act to protect all three futures. If the theory is true, Askeladd becomes the darkest kind of father figure. He raises Thorfinn by refusing to raise him. He teaches through exploitation. He creates dependence while pretending not to care. And when the lesson can go no further, he removes himself. The result is not immediate wisdom. Thorfinn collapses, is enslaved, and spends years haunted by the people he killed. But from that collapse, the teachings of Thors finally return. Askeladd may not have built the new Thorfinn directly. He may simply have destroyed everything preventing that person from emerging. That possibility raises an uncomfortable question. Did Askeladd understand Thors better than Thorfinn did? Young Thorfinn remembers his father's strength but not his meaning. He wants to honor Thors by killing the man responsible for his death. Askeladd, the murderer, recognizes that Thor's true legacy has nothing to do with winning a duel. For years, he watches Thorfinn imitate the surface of his father while betraying the principle beneath it. Perhaps his cruelty is partly fueled by frustration. The boy carries Thor's blood but refuses to hear Thor's words. There is no proof of a secret educational program. Askeladd may simply be an opportunist who grows attached despite himself, but that ambiguity is exactly why the theory endures. Their relationship feels too meaningful to be reduced to convenience, yet too cruel to be called love. Conspiracy theory offers a third category, design disguised as neglect. The story then moves toward England, where another shy child is placed inside a machine designed by older men. Prince Canute initially appears passive, sheltered, and frightened. The common interpretation is that the deaths of Ragnar and the priest Willibald's reflections on love shock him into awakening. Canute chooses to confront his father and becomes a ruler with a terrifying vision of creating paradise on Earth. The next conspiracy theory claims that King Sweyn wanted this awakening to happen. Sweyn openly treats Canute as expendable. He sends him into danger, favors Harold, and appears willing to let political enemies solve the problem of a second prince. Yet a king as experienced as Sweyn understands that pressure can transform people. He also knows that royal succession is rarely secured by kindness. The theory proposes that Canute's apparent abandonment was an extreme test. Sweyn did not merely want Canute dead. He wanted to discover whether Canute possessed the capacity to become dangerous. From a dynastic perspective, a weak spare heir is a liability. He can become a puppet for nobles, clergy, or foreign powers. Killing him removes the risk, but transforming him could create a valuable ruler, general, or counterweight. By exposing Canute to war and stripping away his protectors, Sweyn forces the prince either to perish or to develop the qualities required for kingship. Ragnar's role becomes suspicious under this interpretation. His devotion protects Canute emotionally, but also keeps him dependent. Sweyn may understand that Canute cannot change while Ragnar remains beside him. Although Askeladd arranges Ragnar's death for his own reasons, the outcome serves Sweyn's larger logic perfectly. The prince loses the substitute parent who prevented him from standing alone. Then there is Sweyn's reaction when Canute returns transformed. The king is not simply surprised. He seems to recognize the political creature now standing before him. Their conflict becomes almost intimate, as though Sweyn has finally met the son he was trying to provoke into existence. The theory grows wilder when we consider the possibility that Sweyn expected Canute to challenge Harold eventually. A kingdom with two capable heirs can be divided, but it can also be strengthened if one proves clearly superior. Viking politics often values demonstrated power. Perhaps Sweyn considered fraternal struggle a natural selection process for royalty. If so, Canute's rebellion is not an escape from his father's plan. It is the completion of it. This would explain the strange shadow Sweyn continues to cast over Canute after death. Canute believes he is opposing the old king's world, yet repeatedly adopts the same tools: intimidation, manipulation, seizure of land, and calculated violence. The father he rejects becomes the model inside him. Sweyn wins not by remaining alive, but by ensuring Canute cannot rule without resembling him. The strongest objection is that Sweyn's actions can be explained more simply. He prefers Harold and sees Canute as a political inconvenience. Medieval rulers frequently sent unwanted rivals into dangerous campaigns. There is no need for a hidden test. Canute survives because Askeladd intervenes, and because his own transformation exceeds what anyone expected. Still, Sweyn's intelligence makes pure carelessness difficult to accept. Even if he did not consciously plan every step, he understood the possible outcomes. Sending Canute into war was a wager. Death was acceptable. Transformation may also have been acceptable. Either result removed the harmless, dependent prince who could be used against the crown. The conspiracy therefore does not require Sweyn to predict Canute's exact awakening. It only requires him to create conditions in which weakness could no longer continue. And that leads directly to a related theory. Askeladd manufactured Canute's transformation so completely that the prince's supposed awakening was actually a carefully staged political operation. We know Askeladd manipulates events around Canute. He has Ragnar killed. He challenges the prince. He uses danger, grief, and responsibility to force him out of passivity. What remains uncertain is how early the plan began and how many people were knowingly involved. The extreme theory suggests that Askeladd recognized Canute as a usable royal figure before the prince showed any sign of strength. Rather than merely responding to changing circumstances, he began constructing a king from the moment Canute entered his protection. First, he isolates the prince. Ragnar must disappear because Canute's loyalty to him exceeds loyalty to any political goal. Next, the prince must experience despair. He must believe that divine love, paternal protection, and inherited status have all failed him. Then he must be presented with a new identity, not the child waiting for salvation, but the ruler who will build salvation through force. Willibald's role is especially interesting. The priest's speech about love appears philosophical and spontaneous, yet conspiracy-minded viewers sometimes ask whether Askeladd understood exactly what effect such a man would have on Canute. Willibald dismantles the prince's religious assumptions at the moment of greatest vulnerability. His words do not provide comfort, they create a vacuum. Into that vacuum comes kingship. There is no evidence that Willibald is consciously working for Askeladd. He seems far too sincere and far too consumed by his own search for love. But conspiracies do not always require every participant to know the plan. Askeladd may simply place people together and trust their natures to produce the desired result. He does this repeatedly. He knows how Ragnar will react, how Thorkel will respond to strength, how nobles will move toward power, and how frightened soldiers will follow confidence. His genius is not controlling people like puppets. It is arranging situations in which they control themselves predictably. Canute's awakening therefore becomes less like a miracle and more like a successful experiment in psychological destruction. The old Canute is stripped away. A new political personality takes his place. The disturbing question is whether that new personality truly belongs to Canute. Canute speaks of creating paradise on earth because God has abandoned humanity. It is a grand and personal vision, yet it also serves Askeladd's needs. A king committed to building a stable realm may protect Wales. A king who believes morality justifies political power can be directed toward enormous acts. Askeladd does not simply need a courageous prince, he needs a prince with a mission large enough to resist ordinary temptation. Perhaps the paradise Canute pursues is the story Askeladd implanted in him. The theory can go even further. Askeladd's final sacrifice cements the transformation by giving Canute a founding myth. Canute does not simply inherit power, he inherits it through the death of the man who created him. By killing Askeladd in public, he proves decisiveness, gains legitimacy, and buries the truth of Sweyn's murder beneath a controlled narrative. Askeladd becomes both architect and cornerstone. His death stabilizes the king he manufactured. Of course, Canute is not an empty vessel. He makes choices Askeladd cannot predict. His religious crisis is genuine. His ambition grows far beyond the protection of Wales. Over time, he becomes increasingly capable of manipulating others himself. To say Askeladd created him completely would deny Canute's agency, and Vinland Saga is too interested in personal responsibility for that conclusion to fit comfortably. A more believable version is that Askeladd accelerated a transformation that might otherwise have taken years. He did not invent Canute's intelligence or will. He removed the emotional structures preventing them from emerging. He forced the prince into a shape that could survive. Whether this was liberation or abuse depends on where we stand. To the kingdom, Askeladd produced a powerful ruler. To Canute, he destroyed the last safe part of childhood. To Wales, he created a possible shield. And to Askeladd himself, he may have finally found a substitute for the leader Thor's refused to become. That parallel is important. Askeladd meets two candidates for greatness. Thor's possesses moral authority but rejects political power. Canute possesses political legitimacy but initially lacks authority. Askeladd cannot persuade Thor's to enter history, so he forces Canute to do it. Perhaps the entire first arc is secretly the story of Askeladd trying to rebuild the man he killed, using a prince and a furious child as the surviving pieces. Once Canute and Thorfinn separate, the story seems to divide into two paths. Canute climbs toward power while Thorfinn falls into slavery. Canute accepts violence as the price of building paradise. Thorfinn slowly rejects violence after discovering that every victory has left him empty. They become philosophical opposites, each pursuing a world in which people can live without fear. That contrast has inspired another conspiracy theory. Canute and Thorfinn are not merely parallel characters. They are participants in the same hidden experiment, and Askeladd knowingly set both of them in motion. The theory begins with Askeladd's final day. In a remarkably short period, he removes King Sweyn, protects Wales, places Canute in a position to seize authority, and destroys Thorfinn's reason for living. Two young men are released from their former identities at almost the same moment. Canute is no longer the powerless prince. Thorfinn is no longer the avenger who can imagine that one final duel will solve his life. From there, both begin attempting to answer the same question: how can suffering be ended? Canute's answer is control. If a righteous king holds enough land, wealth, and military strength, he can restrain the chaos of lesser men. Thorfinn's answer is escape and persuasion. If people leave systems built on slavery and war, perhaps they can create a community that does not require either. The conspiracy claims that Askeladd deliberately created these two competing approaches because he did not know which one could succeed. Canute would test peace from above. Thorfinn would eventually test peace from below. One would use the machinery of history. The other would try to step outside it. This idea sounds impossibly elaborate. Askeladd could not predict Thorfinn's enslavement, his friendship with Einar, his return to Iceland, or his dream of Vinland. Yet he did know something about both young men. He knew Canute had the ability to think beyond ordinary kingship. He knew Thorfinn carried Thor's legacy even while rejecting it. Perhaps he did not foresee the exact roads. Perhaps he merely cut the ropes holding both men in place and trusted them to move. Their later meeting at Ketil's farm then takes on the quality of a controlled comparison. Canute arrives with an army, legal justification, and a plan to absorb land into his growing kingdom. Thorfinn stands before him without weapons and attempts to stop violence through endurance and speech. It is the first direct confrontation between the two models. Neither man completely wins. Thorfinn prevents further slaughter and persuades Canute to withdraw from the farm, but only after the violence has already devastated Ketil's people. Canute is moved by Thorfinn's resolve, yet he does not abandon kingship or coercion. They recognize one another as men attempting the same impossible task from opposite directions. Under the conspiracy interpretation, this meeting is Askeladd's final duel, fought by successors who do not realize they are carrying his question: can power create peace, or must peace refuse power? The answer remains unresolved because Vinland Saga refuses simple answers. Canute's kingdom can protect many people, but it depends on threats, taxes, and conquest. Thorfinn's settlement can reject weapons, but it cannot eliminate fear, cultural misunderstanding, or the consequences of history. Each approach exposes the weakness of the other. There is a softer version of the theory that does not require Askeladd to predict anything. It suggests that the story itself treats Canute and Thorfinn as two halves of Thor's unrealized legacy. Thor knew that true strength required refusing violence, but he died before showing how that principle could govern a society. Canute tests whether violence can be mastered. Thorfinn tests whether it can be abandoned. Together, they explore the political problem hidden inside Thor's personal wisdom. Still, conspiracy thinking prefers a hidden architect, and Askeladd fits the role almost too well. He killed Thor's, created Canute, and broke Thorfinn. Long after his death, the world continues arranging itself around the consequences of those acts. The next theory concerns Ketil's farm and is less mystical because much of it is visible in the text. Canute wants Ketil's wealth and land. He uses political pressure and the behavior of Ketil's sons to create a justification for seizure. The conspiracy version, however, argues that nearly every stage of the crisis was engineered in advance and that Ketil never had a real chance to keep his farm. According to this theory, Canute's financial problem was only the public explanation. The farm represented something more valuable than money. It was a model of independent power outside direct royal control. Ketil possessed fertile land, labor, armed retainers, commercial influence, and a reputation large enough to attract loyalty. A king consolidating England could not comfortably allow such an estate to remain autonomous. Canute therefore needed not merely to tax Ketil, but to absorb him. The timing is suspicious. Almer arrives at court desperate for recognition. He is young, insecure, and easy to provoke. Canute's men understand exactly what kind of insult will push him toward violence. Once blood is spilled, the crown gains a legal and political excuse to move against the family. In the simplest reading, Canute notices an opportunity and exploits it. In the conspiracy reading, Almer is baited as part of a prearranged operation. The men around him are not merely mocking a foolish young noble. They are activating the weakest point in Ketil's household. This would mean Canute's court had studied the family beforehand. They knew Thorgil was dangerous but predictable. They knew Alma craved status. They knew Ketil's prosperity depended partly on a public image of strength that did not match the man himself. By applying pressure at the right place, they could trigger a response large enough to justify confiscation. Canute's personal arrival at the farm also appears calculated. A king does not need to sail with a force to collect an ordinary debt. His presence transforms the dispute into a demonstration. Everyone nearby is meant to understand that private wealth exists only while the crown permits it. The theory extends to the battle itself. Canute offers surrender, but on terms that effectively destroy Ketil's independence. He knows Ketil's pride and fear may make surrender impossible. He knows the farm's workers have been told stories about their master's greatness. He may even expect Ketil to rally them into a hopeless defense. A hopeless defense is useful. It allows Canute to crush resistance publicly and then present the outcome as lawful consequence rather than naked theft. From this angle, the farm battle is not a military conflict. It is theater. Canute's professional soldiers face farmers who have been transformed into evidence. Their defeat proves that private force cannot resist the state. The dead become the price of a lesson addressed to every other landowner. Thorfinn disrupts the performance by refusing its logic. He does not challenge Canute's army. He does not defend Ketil's legal claim. He walks through the punishment and speaks directly to the king. This is why Canute laughs when he understands what Thorfinn is trying to do. Thorfinn has stepped outside the script. The conspiracy becomes darker if we ask whether Canute wanted Thorfinn to appear. Leif's search, Thorfinn's enslavement, and the timing of his freedom are too random for Canute to have arranged. Yet once Canute learns who is present, he may allow the confrontation because he wants to test himself against the person who knew him before he became king. Perhaps Canute's withdrawal is not simply persuasion. Perhaps he has already achieved his real goal. Ketil's power is broken. The estate is no longer a meaningful threat. By leaving it nominally intact, Canute gains the appearance of mercy without sacrificing control. This interpretation makes the outcome even more politically sophisticated. The king arrives prepared to seize everything, provokes resistance, destroys the farm's ability to oppose him, and then withdraws after a dramatic conversation. He loses little and gains a legend of restraint. There are limits to the theory. Canute plainly needs revenue, and the crisis develops partly through chance. Thorgil's attack nearly kills him. A plan that exposes the king to assassination is not perfectly controlled. Canute's decision to retreat is also emotionally genuine. Thorfinn reminds him that there are paths beyond the horizon of royal power. But successful conspiracies often contain improvisation. Canute may not control every blade. He only needs to control the story that follows. Whether Ketil's farm was targeted from the start or merely became convenient, the crown turns personal weakness into state advantage with frightening efficiency. Hidden within the farm arc is another mystery, the identity of Snake. Snake is not his real name. His men call him by a title, and his past is deliberately obscured. He is educated, disciplined, and far more skilled than an ordinary farm god. He reads from a text connected to the life of a warrior and recognizes techniques that suggest experience in elite military environments. His relationship with Sverkel has the tenderness of family, but we are never given a full account of how he arrived. This has produced many theories. Some identify him as a disgraced Byzantine soldier. Others imagine that he served in the Varangian Guard, the famous body of northern warriors employed by the Byzantine emperors. A more dramatic conspiracy claims that Snake is a fugitive noble or royal agent living under an assumed identity. The Varangian theory is attractive because Snake's background appears to reach beyond northern Europe. His real name, Rold, is Norse, but his dress, swordsmanship, and reading suggest travel through cultures where literacy and professional military training were more common. The Byzantine world would provide exactly that mixture. If Snake served in the Varangian Guard, his presence on Ketil's farm may not be accidental. He could be hiding from a political failure, a broken oath, or a crime committed during foreign service. Sverkel may know the truth and protect him because Snake once protected someone in the old man's family. The conspiracy version goes further. It proposes that Snake was placed on the farm to observe Kettle for an outside power. Who might that power be? Canute is the obvious candidate. An estate as wealthy as Kettle's would be worth monitoring. Snake's small group could function as security while quietly reporting on Harvest's armed strength and family tensions. His refusal to behave like a spy does not disprove the theory. A good sleeper agent builds a genuine life. Yet Snake's actions during the crisis make royal loyalty unlikely. He defends the farm against Canute's forces and nearly dies doing so. He protects Gardar despite knowing the danger, argues with Kettle, and repeatedly acts according to personal honor rather than political instruction. Another possibility is that he is connected to Thorkel or the Jomsvikings. His skill is high enough to belong among legendary fighters, but he shows no enthusiasm for war. Perhaps he, like Thors, deserted an elite warrior organization and chose obscurity. This would explain why he understands Thorfinn so quickly. He recognizes a man trying to leave the same world. Some fans have even imagined that Snake knew Thors. There is no direct evidence. The timeline allows many possibilities, and elite northern warriors could have crossed paths. If Snake had heard of the Troll of Jom, his fascination with Thorfinn's ability might contain recognition. The sun's movements could remind him of a man whose legend traveled far beyond Jomsborg. The most emotionally satisfying theory is that Snake is a deliberate alternate version of Thors. Both are extraordinary warriors who settle into rural life. Both protect farmers. Both develop affection for an older family structure. Both know that skill with a sword does not make a person good. The difference is that Snake has not renounced violence completely. He remains willing to kill when protection demands it. Under this reading, his hidden past matters less than his narrative purpose. He represents the life Thors might have lived if he had escaped the Jomsvikings but kept one hand on his weapon. He is also the man Thorfinn might become if absolute pacifism proves impossible. Conspiracy theory, however, insists that the missing biography must conceal a specific answer. Perhaps Snake's past was intentionally left blank because naming the kingdom, commander, or crime would connect him to another major character. Maybe he fought for Canute before Canute became king. Maybe he crossed Askeladd in Wales. Maybe he was one of the men who heard rumors of Thor's desertion and quietly chose the same path. The story never confirms these possibilities, and that may be the point. Snake is living proof that a person can step away from an old name. The audience wants to uncover it because stories train us to believe identity is hidden in origins. Snake behaves as though identity is created by present responsibility. The next conspiracy returns us to Jomsborg. It claims that the internal war over leadership was not an unexpected crisis, but the final phase of a plan Floki had been constructing since before Thor's death. Floki's goal is to place Balder at the head of the Jomsvikings. Balder is young, reluctant, and sickened by the violence surrounding him. He has no desire to become the symbol his grandfather needs, yet Floki treats his bloodline as political property. He is willing to manipulate, imprison, and kill in order to control succession. The standard interpretation is that Floki develops this ambition as circumstances change. The conspiracy says the ambition explains his entire career. Perhaps Floki attached himself to Sigvaldi's household with the long-term aim of controlling the next generation. Thor's marriage to Helga disrupted that path. Thors was strong, admired, and connected to the ruling family. His children could become legitimate alternatives to any candidate Floki promoted. Removing Thors was therefore the opening move. Isolating Helga in Iceland kept her branch distant. Building influence inside Jomsborg prepared the institution for Balder. The theory also reinterprets Floki's service to kings and armies. He is not merely a loyal Jomsviking. He gathers relationships, wealth, and obligations that can later be converted into support. Every campaign strengthens the network around his private plan. By the time leadership becomes openly contested, the structure has already been shaped. Balder is less a candidate than a container. Through him, Floki can rule without holding the title himself. This resembles the methods used by royal regents throughout history. A child or reluctant heir offers perfect legitimacy combined with practical weakness. The public receives the correct bloodline. The advisor controls decisions. The theory becomes especially cruel when we consider Baldur's upbringing. If Floki planned this future for years, then Baldur was never raised as a grandson. He was raised as an office. His fears, friendships, and moral preferences are obstacles to be corrected. Even protection becomes a form of imprisonment. Why then does Floki fail to understand him? Because conspirators often mistake control for knowledge. Floki knows what Baldur is supposed to represent but not who he is. He can arrange guards, marriages, and alliances, yet he cannot make Baldur desire the role. Thorfinn's arrival destroys the plan not simply through force but through recognition. He sees Baldur as a child trapped by adult violence. This mirrors Thor's protection of Thorfinn and Thorfinn's own lost childhood. The political crisis becomes personal. One particularly wild theory claims that Baldur's existence was the real reason Floki acted against Thor so early. Perhaps the boy's future birth or lineage had been arranged through family alliances, and Thor's represented a branch that had to be erased before the plan could proceed. The chronology makes this difficult, and there is no evidence of such precise foresight. But the thematic connection is strong enough to keep the idea alive. Floki kills one father to secure one child's political future, only for the dead father's child to return and free that child from it. The Jomsviking conflict also inspires a theory about Thorkel. According to this theory, Thorkel allows political chaos to grow because he secretly wants the Jomsvikings destroyed. This sounds unlike him. Thorkel loves battle, honors the old warrior culture, and seems emotionally attached to Jomsborg. Yet that attachment may be exactly why he recognizes its decay. The organization once produced warriors like Thor's. By the time of the succession crisis, it has become a nest of intrigue, inherited claims, and men fighting for offices rather than glory. Thorkel repeatedly follows strength rather than procedure. He supports Canute when the prince becomes interesting. He responds to courage even in enemies. He is not loyal to institutions in the ordinary sense. He is loyal to experiences that make him feel alive. Perhaps he sees that the Jomsvikings can no longer provide such experiences. Their legendary name has become a political asset controlled by men like Floki. Destroying the organization might be the only way to preserve the meaning it once had. Under this theory, Thorkel's apparent unpredictability is strategic. He encourages conflict, refuses to stabilize succession, and gives Thorfinn room to act because he wants the old structure to collapse. He cannot openly call for abolition without betraying his identity, so he allows a younger generation to do what he cannot. The evidence is mostly thematic. Thorkel does not behave like a secret pacifist. He genuinely enjoys the conflict, but destruction and enjoyment are not mutually exclusive for him. He may want Jomsborg to end in the only manner he considers honorable, through a magnificent struggle rather than slow bureaucratic decline. The wildest extension is that Thorkel recognizes Thorfinn as Thor's political heir before Thorfinn does. He knows Thorfinn does not want command, and that is precisely why he regards him as worthy. Like Askeladd, he sees the paradox. The best possible leader is the man least interested in ruling warriors. If Thorfinn accepts temporary authority only to dissolve the Jomsvikings, he fulfills both sides of Thor's legacy. He demonstrates the strength required to inherit the institution and the wisdom required to end it. Could Thorkel have nudged events toward that outcome? Possibly. Could he have planned every stage? Almost certainly not. Thorkel is too honest about his appetites to resemble Floki, yet he has a warrior's intuition for historical moments. He may not construct conspiracies, but he knows when to let one die. A related theory concerns the Jomsvikings themselves. What if their dissolution was not a defeat for the organization, but a survival strategy? Institutions rarely vanish simply because a leader declares them ended. The men remain. Their skills, loyalties, grudges, and networks travel with them. A formal army can dissolve on paper and continue as mercenary companies, household guards, traders, or pirates. The theory argues that the Jomsvikings intentionally scattered once their political brand became dangerous. By abandoning the fortress and name, they escaped the control of kings while preserving their influence across the northern world. Some may have entered Canute's service, others could have joined regional rulers, a few might have followed trade routes east or west. Their descendants and techniques would continue shaping warfare long after Jomsborg ceased to exist. In that sense, Thorfinn may not destroy the Jomsvikings at all, he privatizes them. This possibility adds an uneasy shadow to his victory. Ending a symbol is easier than ending the culture that created it. The weapons leave the fortress but do not disappear. The men are freed from one hierarchy and may simply sell their violence elsewhere. That is a recurring pattern in Vinland Saga. No single act cleans the world. Thor leaves war, but war follows his son. Thorfinn frees himself from slavery, but slavery continues beyond the farm. Jomsborg dissolves, but the habits of domination remain. Vinland rejects weapons, but fear can turn ordinary tools into weapons at any moment. The conspiracy theory therefore becomes less about secret meetings and more about historical continuity. Perhaps every supposed ending in the story is only a change of name. The Eastern Journey introduces Hild, one of the most important living reminders of Thorfinn's past. When she first meets him, she does not see a peaceful explorer. She sees the raider who destroyed her home and murdered her father. Thorfinn may have changed, but the dead have not returned. Hild agrees to delay revenge only while he continues proving that his new path is real. The common reading is that Hild becomes judge, witness, and eventually friend. The conspiracy theory claims that she never truly intended to kill Thorfinn at all. According to this idea, Hild recognizes almost immediately that killing him would not satisfy her. She has spent years surviving through precision, patience, and control. Unlike young Thorfinn, she does not rush blindly toward revenge. She observes, she gathers evidence, she creates conditions. Her threat therefore functions less as a future execution and more as a mechanism of accountability. By telling Thorfinn that his life depends on remaining faithful to peace, she gives his ideals an external witness. He can no longer quietly compromise and later excuse himself. Hild will see. The conspiracy version suggests that this is deliberate from the first day. Hild understands that Thorfinn already wants to die under the weight of guilt. A quick death would release him. Living under judgment is harder. It forces him to create value in a life he once used to destroy others. If so, Hild's revenge is rehabilitation disguised as punishment. This theory explains why she repeatedly gives Thorfinn room to act. She criticizes him, doubts him, and keeps the crossbow close, but she also protects his companions and helps his plans succeed. She does not behave like a hunter waiting for a convenient moment. She behaves like an examiner who secretly hopes the student passes. Her eventual forgiveness then becomes not a sudden emotional reversal, but the completion of a long experiment. Thorfinn has demonstrated change not through words, but through years of choices. Hild releases him from the sentence because the sentence has achieved its purpose. The darker version of the theory argues that Hild's forgiveness is itself strategic. By removing the threat of punishment, she places the entire burden of pacifism inside Thorfinn. He can no longer tell himself that he avoids killing because Hild will execute him. He must choose peace without surveillance. This is psychologically elegant. While the threat exists, Thorfinn's morality can be interpreted as compliance. Once Hild forgives him, the test becomes real. It also explains why forgiveness arrives before the crisis in Vinland reaches its worst point. Hild may understand that Thorfinn is approaching circumstances in which every option will cause harm. If he is forced to act while still under her threat, he can blame the constraint. By forgiving him, she returns full responsibility. There is little evidence that Hild consciously planned such a sophisticated program from the beginning. Her anger is genuine. Her finger on the trigger is genuine. She experiences conflict because part of her truly wants to kill him. Yet human motives can change before people admit they have changed. The longer she travels with Thorfinn, the more the threat becomes a ritual maintaining their relationship. The theory's most radical claim is that Hild sees herself in Thorfinn and therefore saves him in order to save herself. She is also a brilliant child shaped by a murdered father. She also turns grief into a weapon. She also believes that one death might settle an unbearable debt. By refusing to shoot, she interrupts the cycle at the exact point where Thorfinn failed to interrupt it after Thor's died. In this sense, Hild is not merely judging Thorfinn, she is correcting the opening of Vinland Saga. Young Thorfinn climbed onto Askeladd's ship and allowed revenge to consume his life. Hild climbs into Thorfinn's journey and carries revenge beside her without allowing it to command every decision. She proves that grief does not have to disappear before a person chooses differently. A conspiracy theory need not involve a government or secret society. Sometimes the concealed plan belongs to the heart. Hild tells herself she is waiting to kill Thorfinn, while quietly arranging opportunities for him to become someone she can forgive. Standing near Hild in the Eastern Arc is Garm, a character so intensely drawn toward battle that he seems less like an ordinary person and more like the spirit of Viking violence given a human body. He is talented, impulsive, and fascinated by opponents who can relieve his boredom. This has inspired the theory that Garm was deliberately created by a military organization as a living weapon. There is no laboratory in Vinland Saga and no modern program training super soldiers. The conspiracy is political rather than scientific. Garm may have been identified as a violent prodigy while still young, separated from stable relationships and rewarded whenever he became useful in combat. Instead of teaching him loyalty to a cause, his handlers taught him loyalty to stimulation. Such a soldier is difficult to control but easy to direct. Point him toward the strongest enemy and promise an interesting fight. He will move willingly. The theory explains why Garm seems strangely empty outside combat. He does not pursue wealth, land, family, or ideology with much conviction. Battle is not a tool for obtaining something else. It is the only environment in which his identity feels complete. That resembles addiction more than warrior honor. Who created him? Floki is one possibility. A man obsessed with political control would value an assassin detached from ordinary morality. Garm's unpredictability could even be useful, because it allows Floki to deny responsibility when violence exceeds orders. Another possibility is that Garm emerged from the broader mercenary economy. Warlords across Europe constantly require men who can raid, intimidate, and kill without hesitation. A talented child could be passed from group to group, each reinforcing the behavior that kept him profitable. No single mastermind would be necessary. The system itself would be the conspiracy. This is often the most frightening explanation in Vinland Saga. There may be no room full of powerful men planning suffering. There may only be incentives that repeatedly produce the same kind of person. Garm is sometimes described as an alternate Thorfinn, and the comparison is unavoidable. Both possess extraordinary speed, both enter battle young, both become tools for older commanders, but Thorfinn's violence is attached to grief and a specific goal. Garm's violence has become self-sustaining. The theory proposes that Garm is what Askeladd could have turned Thorfinn into if he had removed the promise of a duel. Thorfinn tells himself each mission brings him closer to revenge. That story preserves a small connection to the person he was before. Garm has no such story, he is pure function. This makes Thorfinn's way of defeating him significant. Thorfinn does not merely overpower Garm, he uses the emotional rhythm Askeladd once used against him. He provokes impatience, controls distance, and exposes predictability. In doing so, Thorfinn demonstrates that he now understands the machine that shaped his childhood. The Wildest version of the Garm theory claims that Floki selected him specifically as a replacement for Thorfinn. Floki had once hired Askeladd to remove Thor's, inadvertently creating a deadly child who later became entangled in royal politics. Perhaps he studied that outcome. Garm could be a second attempt, a young fighter with Thorfinn-like talent but no family mission, no moral inheritance, and no claim to Jomsborg. A controllable Thorfinn without Thor's. There is no direct confirmation. Garm's personality may simply be his own, heightened by the violent world around him. Yet the idea fits Floki's repeated tendency to treat young people as pieces. Balder is a vessel for legitimacy. Garm is a vessel for force. Neither is allowed to become fully human while useful to the plan. From men who are transformed into weapons, we turn to a woman who repeatedly refuses the life designed for her. Gudrid wants to travel. She resists the roles assigned by marriage, household expectation, and gender. She joins Thorfinn's expedition, becomes one of its emotional centers, and links the fictional story to one of the most remarkable travelers in the old Vinland traditions. The conspiracy theory surrounding Gudrid claims that history deliberately minimized her role because the real expedition was far more dependent on her than later storytellers wanted to admit. Even outside the manga, the historical Gudrid occupies an extraordinary position in the sagas. She travels across the North Atlantic, reaches Vinland, becomes the mother of Snorri, and later undertakes further journeys. Yet popular retellings often place male explorers at the center. Leif discovers, Thorfinn leads, kings authorize, warriors fight. The theory argues that this pattern is not neutral. Medieval storytelling and later historical tradition preserved Gudrid while subtly moving authority away from her. Her knowledge, diplomacy, family networks, and practical leadership may have been distributed among male characters when the accounts were shaped. Vinland Saga could therefore be read as a partial restoration disguised as fiction. Manga Gudrid begins inexperienced, but her hunger for the horizon is treated as fundamental rather than decorative. She is not merely the hero's wife waiting on a distant shore. She chooses the expedition and shares its consequences. The conspiracy version goes further. What if Gudrid, not Thorfinn, was the true guardian of the Vinland story? Thorfinn's historical expedition failed to establish a permanent settlement. A failed leader's account can disappear. Gudrid, however, survived, traveled, and became connected to descendants with reasons to preserve family history. The saga may exist in recognizable form because she carried it home. If so, every version of Thorfinn's story is indirectly Gudrid's version. That possibility creates an entertaining meta-theory about the manga. The narrator may appear to follow Thorfinn, but the emotional selection of events could reflect stories Gudrid later told. Moments emphasizing Thorfinn's kindness, doubts, and growth would be the memories of someone who loved him. Moments he might prefer to hide could survive because she understood that redemption without truth is meaningless. This would also explain why domestic life matters so much in the later story. Traditional heroic sagas often privilege battles, feuds, and claims. A Gudrid-shaped account would remember births, meals, arguments, weather, travel arrangements, and the human cost surrounding heroic decisions. The most conspiratorial form of the idea imagines that church writers later altered Gudrid's testimony to serve religious or genealogical goals. Her pilgrimage, descendants, and conversion would be emphasized, while indigenous perspectives and the ethical failure of colonization would be reduced. The surviving sagas would therefore be not simple records, but negotiated documents built from family pride, Christian interpretation, and oral memory. Vinland Saga itself plays with this uncertainty. It uses historical names while transforming motives. It invites us to ask not only what happened, but who benefited from the version that survived. Could Gudrid have been the expedition's secret leader? In formal terms, probably not. The society around her would still recognize male authority, and the historical sources identify Thorfinn as a central organizer. But leadership is larger than title. The person who keeps a community emotionally coherent, persuades others to continue, and preserves the account afterward may shape history more deeply than the person whose name appears first. This leads to another theory. Leif Erikson knowingly invented the image of Vinland as a paradise in order to attract settlers and rescue his family's declining colonial project. Within Thorfinn's childhood, Leif's stories offer a dream. Vinland is warm, fertile, and free from the hunger and violence of the known world. It becomes the opposite of the cold village and the battlefield. To a child listening beside the fire, it sounds almost magical. But explorers and colonizers often advertise distant lands selectively. They emphasize timber, pasture, grapes, and opportunity while minimizing dangerous seas, unfamiliar climates, isolation, and existing inhabitants. A successful story can recruit labor, investors, and families more effectively than a map. The conspiracy claims Leif understands this perfectly. His description of Vinland is propaganda. That does not mean he invents the land. He has seen Western shores and genuinely believes in their potential, but he packages reality into a promise. The name itself may be part of the salesmanship. A land associated with vines and abundance is more appealing than a land described through insects, harsh winters, and uncertain relations with local peoples. Why would Leif do this? Greenlandic settlements require resources. Timber is limited, trade routes are fragile. Western exploration could provide raw materials and prestige. A new settlement might extend the influence of his family and create a chain of Norse communities across the Atlantic. In the innocent version, Leif is simply enthusiastic. In the conspiracy version, he is an experienced promoter building a colonial venture. His search for Thorfinn then acquires another motive. Leif is moved by guilt and affection, but Thorfinn is also the ideal figure to lead an expedition. He is connected to respected families, hardened by experience and emotionally attached to Vinland through childhood stories. Saving him means recovering both a person and a future settler. This theory does not make Leif malicious. Propaganda is often spread by people who believe it. Leif may repeat the paradise image because he needs it himself. The dangerous sea, failed voyages, and limits of age become bearable if the Western land remains a symbol of unfinished possibility. The theory becomes more interesting when Thorfinn finally arrives and discovers that Vinland is not empty. The land is beautiful, but it is already home. It contains relationships, memory, politics, and fear. The dream of a place outside history collides with people who possess their own history. Did Leif know enough to warn him? Perhaps he did not understand the scale or complexity of indigenous life. Perhaps earlier encounters were brief. But if he softened what he knew, then the entire settlement begins with withheld information. Thorfinn sails toward peace using a map drawn by colonial optimism. The wildest version of the theory says Leif always knew permanent coexistence was unlikely. He had seen how quickly trade could become conflict. He nevertheless allowed Thorfinn to believe in an untouched refuge because the dream was the only force capable of moving people west. That would make Leif both mentor and accidental deceiver. He gives Thorfinn the horizon that saves his soul, but the horizon cannot deliver what the story promised. There is a strong objection. Leif repeatedly demonstrates compassion and has little interest in conquest. His Vinland stories are offered to inspire, not manipulate. A child's memory may also make them sound more perfect than they were. Thorfinn transforms fragments into utopia because he needs an alternative to war. This creates a more subtle conspiracy. Leif never lied. Thorfinn edited the story inside his own mind. He hears that the land is fertile and far from slave traders. He concludes that violence itself can be left behind. He turns geographical distance into moral distance. The imagined Vinland is therefore a collaboration between Leif's enthusiasm and Thorfinn's desperation. And this brings us to one of the largest theories in the entire series. Vinland is not actually a place. It is an idea deliberately presented as geography so that Thorfinn can learn that no geography can save him. Of course, Vinland physically exists in the story and in the historical tradition. Ships reach it. People build houses and cultivate fields. The theory is symbolic rather than literal. It argues that the narrative never intends the Western settlement to become a permanent answer. Its purpose is to expose the weakness in Thorfinn's concept of escape. After the farm, Thorfinn imagines creating a land without war or slavery. At first, distance appears essential. Europe is saturated with kings, armies, debts, and inherited hatred. Vinland lies beyond their immediate reach. It seems possible to begin with clean soil. But soil is never clean in that sense. Other people already live there. Settlers carry memory, hierarchy, fear, and technology inside themselves. The very act of arrival changes the balance of the place. Even a peaceful colony needs food, boundaries, rules, and methods for resolving disputes. The conspiracy theory says the story has been quietly telling us this from the beginning. Thor says a true warrior needs no sword, but he does not say a true society needs no conflict. Willibald says human beings discriminate in the way they love. Canute discovers that paradise built through power becomes another kingdom. Ketil's farm appears peaceful while depending on slavery. Every supposed refuge contains the structure it claims to escape. Vinland is the final and largest refuge, so it must reveal the final version of the same truth. In this reading, Thorfinn's real task is not to establish a flawless country. It is to carry the practice of peace into places where failure is guaranteed. Vinland's collapse does not disprove his ideals. It removes the childish belief that ideals can be secured permanently by crossing an ocean. The Wild variation claims that Thor's already understood this. When he spoke of having no enemies and suggested fleeing beyond the reach of violence, he was not describing a destination. He was describing an internal movement. Thorfinn interprets his father literally because he is still searching for a world where goodness becomes easy. Perhaps the title Vinland Saga is therefore a deliberate misdirection. The saga is not about reaching Vinland. It is about discovering that Vinland cannot be owned, founded, or defended like an ordinary nation. The moment it becomes territory controlled by one group, it begins turning back into the world Thorfinn fled. This theory can sound pessimistic, but it may be the opposite. If Vinland were only a distant location, most people could never reach it. If Vinland is the continuing decision to reduce harm, tell the truth, and refuse dehumanization, then it can exist anywhere, although never safely and never once and for all. A conspiracy theorist might say that Yukimura has hidden the true Vinland in plain sight. It appears whenever a person interrupts the expected chain of revenge. Thor creates it for a moment on Askeladd's ship. Arnheid imagines it as a place beyond suffering. Thorfinn and Einar create it while clearing a field together. Hild creates it when she lowers the crossbow. Cordelia creates it when strength is used to protect rather than dominate. The physical colony is only the most ambitious attempt to make those moments permanent. And permanence may be the one thing peace can never promise. The most openly mysterious event in the final arc arrives through Misquequipudge, the elder shaman who performs a ritual and sees images of a terrible future. What he witnesses extends far beyond the immediate Norse settlement. The vision contains the long shadow of colonization, mass death, slavery, industrial war, and destruction on a scale no person in the 11th century could ordinarily imagine. This moment creates several competing conspiracy theories because it seems to break the rules of Vinland Saga's world. The series contains exaggerated physical ability, symbolic dreams, and religious experiences, but it usually remains grounded in human perception. Then an elder appears to see centuries ahead. The first theory is the most direct. Misquequipudge genuinely accesses the future. If this is true, the universe of Vinland Saga contains a supernatural warning system. The ritual allows him to cross ordinary time and witness the consequences of European settlement in the Americas. His fear is therefore not prejudice, manipulation, or misunderstanding. It is informed resistance to a future catastrophe. That interpretation changes the moral balance of the settlement. Thorfinn knows his own intentions are peaceful. The shaman knows intentions will not control the centuries that follow. Even if Arnheid village remains gentle, its existence may become the first thread in a chain leading toward conquest. The theory raises a painful question. Does a peaceful individual have the right to begin a process whose distant consequences are violent? Thorfinn cannot answer because he cannot see what Misquequipudge sees. He judges the present community. The shaman judges history as a completed pattern. The conspiracy-minded version claims that the ritual does not merely reveal the future. It is a message sent backward by the future. Perhaps the images are not passive prophecy but ancestral memory moving in the opposite direction. The suffering of later generations becomes so immense that it echoes into the past through ceremony, land, and collective consciousness. Misquequipudge receives not a prediction, but a warning from descendants who already endured the outcome. This sounds like science fiction, yet Vinland Saga's treatment of memory makes it strangely fitting. Thorfinn is haunted by the dead. Cultural trauma shapes people who did not witness its beginning. Stories move across generations and influence choices long after their original speakers are gone. The vision could be a supernatural extension of that idea. History remembers before it happens. Another theory offers a more grounded explanation. Misquequipudge does not literally see the future. He experiences a symbolic vision assembled from information he already possesses. He understands that the newcomers carry iron, livestock, unfamiliar trade goods, and a social structure capable of organized expansion. He observes their desire for land. He sees how quickly some settlers reach for weapons when afraid. From these details, his mind produces images representing where such forces might lead. The vision is accurate not because magic reveals history, but because colonial patterns are already visible in miniature. A single sword suggests armies, a field cut into shared land suggests boundaries, trade goods suggest dependence, disease suggests mass death. The shaman's intelligence transforms these clues into a symbolic nightmare. The exact modern images then belong to the reader rather than the character. We may be seeing a visual translation of his fear, rendered in forms recognizable to us. He experiences smoke, thunder, chains, and dead generations. The manga presents factories, war, and weapons from the future so that we understand the scale. This theory preserves the realistic world while respecting his insight. Misquequipudge is not magically omniscient. He is historically correct because he recognizes the direction of power. A third theory is more conspiratorial. Someone within the Norse settlement deliberately manipulates or intensifies the shaman's vision in order to provoke war. The obvious suspects would be settlers who want weapons and greater control. If peaceful coexistence continues, Thorfinn's rules remain in place. Fear of an indigenous attack gives militarists justification to arm themselves, centralize authority, and seize resources. Could someone have interfered with the ritual, supplied false information, or staged threatening behavior to confirm the shaman's fears? There is little textual support for direct interference. The ritual occurs within the LNU community, and Misquequipudge's concern develops from genuine observation. Yet the broader mechanism of provocation is real. Men such as Ivar carry the sword not simply as a tool but as an argument. Its presence creates the danger it is supposed to prevent. The conspiracy may therefore be systemic rather than personal. The weapon manipulates everyone. To the Norse settlers, the sword promises protection. To the LNU, it demonstrates concealed violent capacity. To Ivar, suspicion from the LNU proves the sword was necessary. Each response becomes evidence for the next. No mastermind is required because fear produces a self-confirming loop. The shaman's vision is then the largest possible image of that loop. He sees where the logic of defensive preparation can lead when repeated across generations. Every empire claims it needs one more weapon because another group may be dangerous. Every fortified border convinces the other side to prepare. Eventually, entire civilizations organize themselves around preventing attacks they help make inevitable. The Wildest theory claims that Misquequipudge sees not one fixed future, but the future created specifically by Thorfinn's settlement. This matters because many readers assume the vision depicts broad historical colonization that will occur regardless of Thorfinn. But what if Arnheid village is the crucial origin point in this fictional timeline? What if one surviving map, story, or trade route eventually guides later expeditions to the region? Thorfinn's peaceful dream would unknowingly leave information that conquerors later use. Under this theory, simply departing may not be enough. The knowledge has already crossed the ocean. Crops, tools, words, and memories have already moved between peoples. History cannot be reset. This would make the colony's true legacy neither success nor failure but connection. Once contact occurs, both worlds are permanently altered. The moral question is no longer whether Thorfinn can preserve innocence. Innocence is already gone. The question is what kind of memory the contact leaves. Perhaps this explains why the final struggle is so concerned with communication. If later generations remember only conflict, the first encounter becomes a justification for future hostility. If they also remember cooperation, restraint, and grief shared across groups, a different moral possibility survives even if political history follows a violent path. Msquequpej may see the future accurately and still misunderstand his power over it. Prophecy often creates the event it fears. His efforts to prevent colonization increase suspicion, which helps produce violence, which confirms the settlers' belief that armed defense is necessary. Thorfinn faces the same trap. His determination to avoid war can make him conceal danger, delay hard decisions, and frustrate settlers who then act without him. Both men attempt to save the future and accidentally narrow the present. This leads to a theory more disturbing than any secret assassin. The true invader in Vinland Saga is not the sword, it is disease. Historical contact between previously separated populations often carried devastating biological consequences. People can intend peace, forbid weapons, and exchange gifts in friendship, while microbes move invisibly between them. A settlement may become destructive before anyone chooses violence. The conspiracy theory says that the story's repeated attention to illness is quietly preparing us to understand this. Disease is the enemy no warrior can challenge and no pacifist can negotiate with. It travels through breath, cloth, food, animals, and touch. It turns hospitality into exposure. In this interpretation, Msquequpej's future vision is triggered not primarily by iron but by biological recognition. He observes sickness around the newcomers or senses that their arrival changes patterns of health. His fear of the Norse is therefore based on a threat they cannot see. The Wild version claims that one of the settlers knowingly hides an outbreak to prevent Thorfinn from abandoning the colony. The motive would be understandable. Years of labor, money, and hope have been invested. Admitting that contact itself is dangerous would mean there is no simple adjustment capable of saving the project. There is no clear evidence of a deliberate cover-up, yet communities often conceal illness without formal conspiracy. People minimize symptoms, leaders fear panic, traders do not want routes closed, families protect loved ones from isolation. A collective silence can emerge from many private decisions. This kind of conspiracy is especially realistic because nobody needs to meet in secret. Each person tells a small lie for a personal reason. Together, the lies create disaster. The disease theory also attacks Thorfinn's belief that moral intention is the central variable. He can control whether he carries a sword. He cannot fully control what his body carries. He can promise not to enslave. He cannot promise that contact will be harmless. Does this make the expedition immoral from the beginning? Not necessarily. The people of the 11th century do not possess modern knowledge of infection. They understand illness through experience but cannot map microscopic transmission. Moral responsibility depends partly on what a person can know. Still, the theory forces a hard conclusion. Peace is not merely the absence of hostile intent. It requires knowledge, humility, and willingness to stop when harm appears, even if the harm does not feel like anyone's fault. The settlement's livestock create a related concern. Animals are food, labor, and security for the Norse. They can also damage local environments, frighten communities, and carry disease. A cow wandering across an invisible boundary may alter relations more decisively than a warrior's speech. This inspires the ecological conspiracy theory. The settlers are not defeated by the LNU, they are defeated by wheat. Wheat represents farming, permanence, and the dream of transforming land into a familiar home. For Thorfinn and Einar, cultivation once meant freedom. Clearing and planting Ketil's field allowed them to rebuild themselves. It is natural that they carry agriculture into Vinland as a symbol of peace. But agriculture is not neutral. Fields require cleared space. Permanent harvests encourage boundaries, storage, and defense. Surplus creates wealth. Wealth creates inequality and attracts control. The tool of liberation on the farm can become the foundation of territorial power in Vinland. The conspiracy theory suggests that Einar's beloved wheat is the hidden engine pulling Arnheid village back toward Europe. At first, the settlers merely want enough food, then they need additional land, they protect fields from animals, they argue about who worked which area and who deserves the harvest, they build structures to store grain, someone must oversee distribution. A peaceful farming community slowly develops property, authority, and enforcement. No villain plans this, the crop itself organizes society. This is why the theory calls wheat the wildest conspirator. It gives everyone reasonable instructions one step at a time. Clear this patch, build this fence, guard this storehouse, punish whoever takes what you planted. Before long, a settlement founded against violence possesses all the material causes of violence. The LNU may view land through different patterns of use and relationship. To them, a field can appear not as improvement, but as exclusion. The North Sea labor invested in soil and conclude ownership. The local community sees shared land transformed without permanent consent. Both sides can be sincere. Conflict grows from incompatible meanings attached to the same ground. Under this theory, Thorfinn's greatest mistake is not permitting a sword. It is assuming that farming automatically produces peace because farming once saved him. He universalizes his personal redemption. What healed a slave on Ketil's estate may not heal a meeting between societies. Einar's role makes this theory emotionally painful. He dreams of a place where no master can take the fruits of another person's labor. Yet a field protected from a king may still be taken from someone who did not understand it was being claimed. This brings us to the conspiracy that Einar, not Thorfinn, is the true founder of Arnheid village and the secret author of the Vinland project. Thorfinn supplies the vision and historical name. Einar supplies the emotional reason. Without Einar, Vinland remains a childhood story. It is their shared experience of slavery, Arnheid's suffering, and the destruction of the farm that transforms the idea into a concrete plan. Einar understands land differently from Thorfinn. Thorfinn grew up around farmers but spent his formative years as a warrior. Einar's identity is rooted in cultivation. He knows seasons, effort, and the dignity of making food. When they clear the forest together, he teaches Thorfinn how freedom can be built through repeated ordinary work. The theory argues that Thorfinn becomes the public face because his name, family connections, combat reputation, and relationship with Leif make him useful. Einar is the ideological center hidden behind him. Naming the village after Arnheid supports this reading. The colony is not merely Thorfinn's tribute to Thor's or Leif's Western dream. It is Einar's memorial to a woman destroyed by slavery and ownership. Its founding promise is shaped by his grief. Perhaps Thorfinn's pacifism and Einar's agrarian freedom are separate projects temporarily traveling together. Thorfinn wants a land without enemies. Einar wants land no master can confiscate. These goals overlap until crisis reveals their differences. When survival, property, and defense become urgent, Einar may feel Thorfinn is sacrificing the concrete safety of settlers for an abstract moral vow. Thorfinn may feel Einar is rebuilding the same violent logic they fled. Their disagreement is not betrayal. It is the collision of two founding philosophies. The conspiracy version claims that the settlement was always destined to split because it had two secret constitutions. One constitution is Thorfinn's: no swords, no slaves, negotiation before force, withdrawal rather than conquest. The other is Einar's: labor creates a right to the land, the community must protect what it builds, and freedom is meaningless if everything can be taken again. Neither constitution is written in full. Each man assumes the other understands. Peace continues while circumstances do not force a choice between them. This theory helps explain why Einar cannot simply follow Thorfinn forever. He is not a sidekick losing faith in the hero. He is a co-founder defending the half of the dream that Thorfinn overlooks. The wildest form of the theory says that later storytellers deliberately gave Thorfinn sole credit because societies prefer a single male founder to a partnership involving a former slave. Einar's social position makes him easier to erase. Thorfinn has the historical name that survives in sagas. Einar's contribution remains inside the village's emotional architecture rather than the official record. If that is true, Arnheid village is itself a conspiracy of memory. Its most important founder becomes invisible, just as the labor of ordinary settlers disappears behind the name of an explorer. The person who most completely complicates traditional ideas of strength in the final story is Cordelia. She possesses extraordinary physical power and a gentle nature shaped by years of rejection. Her connection to Thorkel's bloodline invites comparison with the most violent warrior in the series, yet her deepest desire is belonging rather than battle. This has produced a beautiful conspiracy theory. Cordelia is the true spiritual successor to Thor's. Thorfinn is Thor's son and consciously carries his teachings, but inheritance in Vinland Saga rarely follows blood cleanly. Askeladd, Canute, Einar, Hild, and others each preserve a different part of Thor's meaning. Cordelia may embody the most difficult part, possessing overwhelming strength without wanting to dominate. Thor's reaches that position after years as a warrior. Cordelia begins closer to it. She knows what it means to be feared for the body she inhabits. She understands that strength can isolate a person even before it is used. The conspiracy theory says the narrative hides Thor's return inside Cordelia, not reincarnation in a literal sense, but the reappearance of his moral shape where nobody expects it. Like Thor's, she can alter a confrontation simply by standing present. Like Thor's, she becomes most powerful when protecting vulnerable people. Like Thor's, her refusal to embrace a warrior identity confuses those who believe physical capacity creates obligation. This would make Thorkel's family line carry two opposite possibilities. Thorkel represents delight in strength. Cordelia represents responsibility under strength. The same inheritance produces both the old Viking ideal and its transformation. The Wild extension claims that Thorkel recognizes this and is secretly proud, even if he lacks the language to express it. He may see in Cordelia the quality he admired but never understood in Thor's. His fascination with true warriors has always contained a desire for someone to prove that courage is larger than combat. Cordelia's role in protecting the settlement also exposes a contradiction in Thorfinn's rules. A community without weapons can still depend on a powerful body as an unofficial weapon. Thorfinn may reject swords while unconsciously relying on Cordelia's ability to deter harm. Is that peace, or has violence simply been hidden inside a person? The conspiracy argues that Thorfinn's colony uses Cordelia in the same way societies use soldiers while claiming to value peace. She becomes a reserve of force everyone hopes not to name. Her gentleness makes the arrangement easier to ignore. If true, this is deeply unfair. Cordelia wants acceptance, and the community may offer it partly because she is useful. Her moral test is therefore not simply whether she will fight. It is whether she can belong without allowing others to define her through strength. Her presence asks the question Thor's story left unresolved. What should a true warrior do when peaceful people quietly depend on the possibility that the warrior might become violent? The contradictions surrounding Cordelia lead naturally into a much larger theory about the entire story. What if the Vinland Saga we are reading is not an objective account at all? What if it is a story being reconstructed centuries later by descendants, priests, poets, and political families, each of whom alters the truth? This is the unreliable saga theory. The real medieval Vinland accounts were preserved through oral tradition and written down long after many of the events they describe. Different versions disagree. People are combined, omitted, or presented according to the needs of the storyteller. Vinland Saga openly borrows from that world of uncertain memory. The conspiracy theory claims that the manga's exaggerated feats and perfect dramatic parallels are clues that we are watching legend rather than literal history. Thorkel throws logs and fights with impossible power because later storytellers magnified a famous warrior. Thor's defeats groups of armed men without killing because descendants transformed a respected figure into a moral saint. Askeladd's every move seems brilliant because the surviving account compresses accidents into strategy. Thorfinn's life becomes a clean journey from violence to peace because families prefer meaningful arcs to confused reality. Under this interpretation, the truth beneath the saga may be smaller, messier, and more ordinary. Perhaps Thors was an excellent fighter but not superhuman. Perhaps Askeladd's identity was assembled from several mercenary leaders. Perhaps young Thorfinn spent only part of his childhood with the band, while the saga turns those years into one continuous revenge story. Perhaps Canut's transformation occurred gradually through many advisors, then later poets placed it inside one dramatic night. The theory does not weaken the story, it changes the kind of truth being offered. A saga can be historically inaccurate while preserving how people understood themselves. Thorkel's strength tells us what warrior culture admired. Thor's mercy tells us what later generations wished strength could become. The supernatural vision tells us how descendants interpret the catastrophe that followed contact. The identity of the imagined narrator becomes important. Who would want Thorfinn remembered as a pacifist? Gudrid and her descendants are obvious possibilities. They have personal reasons to preserve his best qualities. A family tracing its line to Vinland could turn a difficult expedition into an origin story. Thorfinn becomes not merely an explorer but a moral ancestor. The church is another possibility. Later Christian writers might emphasize his rejection of pagan violence, his compassion, and the emptiness of worldly conquest. They could reshape Thor's teachings to resemble Christian ethics, even when the characters themselves relate to faith in complicated ways. Canut's political descendants might also influence the record. A saga that portrays the king as harsh but visionary can legitimize a powerful dynasty. His poisonings, seizures, and wars become the tragic cost of order rather than ordinary ambition. The Wildest conspiracy claims that the surviving narrative is a compromise between these interests. Gudrid's family protects Thorfinn, royal tradition protects Canut, Welsh memory protects Askeladd, warrior storytelling enlarges Thorkel. The result is a story where every important faction receives a legendary representative. What then has been erased? The unnamed dead first of all. Villages destroyed by raiders appear briefly, while the men responsible receive years of development. Enslaved people pass through markets without biographies. Farmers killed in royal campaigns become background. Indigenous individuals who do not interact directly with the settlement disappear from the account. Hild's presence can be read as the stories attempt to resist this erasure. She enters carrying the name and face of one victim. Einar does the same for families destroyed by war and slavery. Arnheid does it for women trapped inside systems of ownership. Each character breaks into a heroic saga and demands that consequences receive as much attention as heroes. Perhaps this is why the manga repeatedly questions who deserves a story. The conspiracy is not simply that later writers altered history. It is that all storytelling naturally follows power unless someone deliberately looks away from kings and warriors. An especially strange version of the unreliable saga theory suggests that Thorfinn himself encouraged an idealized account because he wanted future generations to believe peace was possible. Imagine an older Thorfinn describing his life. He knows the colony failed. He knows he compromised, misjudged people, and could not prevent every death. If he tells the story exactly as confusion, listeners may conclude that violence is unavoidable and his entire attempt was foolish. So he shapes the account around lessons. Thors becomes the clear voice he only understood years later. Askeladd becomes the perfect embodiment of cunning. Canut becomes the opposite road. Einar becomes the faithful partner. Vinland becomes the great test. This would not be deception for personal glory. It would be moral propaganda. Thorfinn might believe that people need a memorable phrase, such as having no enemies more than they need, every qualification surrounding it. A complex philosophy becomes a sentence a frightened person can recall before striking someone. The danger is that simplification creates its own mythology. Future admirers may repeat Thorfinn's words without understanding the labor, failure, and sacrifice behind them. They may turn pacifism into a way of feeling pure rather than a practice requiring risk. The theory therefore turns the audience into part of the conspiracy. Every time we reduce Thorfinn to an inspiring image, we participate in editing him. This connects to a modern fan theory that the entire series is secretly a warning about consuming violence as entertainment. Vinland Saga begins by giving the audience many features associated with a thrilling Viking epic: raids, duels, extraordinary warriors, political schemes, and revenge. Young Thorfinn is easy to follow because his goal is simple. We want to see him become stronger and confront Askeladd. Then the story gradually reveals the cost of what entertained us. The impressive battles were somebody's burned home. The warrior's growth was a child's moral collapse. The clever commander was feeding men into suffering. When Thorfinn stops fighting, some viewers feel the same frustration he feels when deprived of revenge. The conspiracy theory says this reaction was planned from the beginning. The first arc is bait. Yukimura invites the audience to enjoy the warrior world, then removes its glamour and asks why we wanted it. The long farm arc functions like withdrawal. There are fewer fights because Thorfinn is learning to live without the stimulation on which both he and the audience depended. Garm later represents the viewer who only wants the old Thorfinn back. He tries to provoke combat because peaceful Thorfinn is boring to him. Thorkel often serves a similar role, expressing delight whenever the story approaches violence. Under this theory, the greatest conspiracy is between author and audience. We believe we are watching Thorfinn escape violence. In reality, the story is testing whether we will allow him to escape. This explains why debates over pacifism become so intense. A purely philosophical disagreement would remain abstract, but viewers have invested emotional pleasure in Thorfinn's skill. His refusal to use it can feel like a talent being wasted. The story forces us to notice that thought and ask what it means to view a human being primarily through his usefulness in conflict. The same trap surrounds Cordelia. We celebrate her gentleness but wait eagerly to see her strength unleashed. We claim to admire Thor's beliefs while replaying his fight scenes. We condemn Garm's hunger for combat while sharing a little of it. The conspiracy theory is persuasive because Vinland Saga understands that opposition to violence can itself become a spectacle. A beautiful speech, a heroic refusal, and a bloodless victory can provide the emotional satisfaction of battle without changing the structures beneath it. Thorfinn's final challenge is therefore not winning an argument, it is accepting outcomes that do not feel triumphant. This leads to one of the most controversial theories. Thorfinn always knew the Vinland settlement would fail. On the surface, this appears false. He invests years of work, crosses dangerous seas, and brings families to build a new home. His hope is sincere. He negotiates as though coexistence can last. He is devastated when the dream breaks apart. But the theory argues that a deeper part of him expects failure and chooses the expedition anyway. Thorfinn has seen too much of the world to believe people become harmless when they cross an ocean. He knows settlers carry fear. He knows peaceful farms can rest on hidden violence. He knows even good rulers use coercion. He knows he cannot control every person who joins him. Why then does he establish rules so vulnerable to a single concealed sword? Perhaps because the colony is not meant to prove that a perfect society can survive. It is meant to prove that people can attempt one without beginning from conquest. In this interpretation, Thorfinn treats Arnheid village as an experiment whose moral value does not depend on permanence. A season, a year, or several years without slavery and organized war are still real. Children experience that time. Friendships cross cultural boundaries. People discover alternatives they can carry elsewhere. The conspiracy says Thorfinn conceals this limited expectation because settlers would not follow a leader who announced that the project might be temporary. He speaks of a new country while privately preparing to withdraw if coexistence becomes impossible. His insistence on escape as the first response to conflict supports the idea. Most founders treat land as something to defend. Thorfinn treats it as something that must be abandoned before people are killed for it. This suggests he never regards possession as absolute. Perhaps his true plan is mobile Vinland. Establish peace where possible, leave when it hardens into domination, and begin again. That strategy resembles flight and can never provide permanent security, yet it preserves the refusal to make others pay for one group's dream. The darker version of the theory claims that Thorfinn's unconscious expectation of failure becomes self-sabotage. Because he is always prepared to leave, he does not build institutions capable of handling conflict. He relies on personal trust, moral example, and his own ability to mediate. The settlement remains dependent on him. A community designed around one exceptionally committed person is fragile. When Thorfinn is absent, injured, or doubted, there is no shared structure strong enough to replace him. People such as Ivar fill the vacuum. Did Thorfinn avoid creating authority because all authority reminded him of Canute? Did fear of becoming a ruler prevent him from distributing responsibility wisely? If so, the colony fails partly because Thorfinn confuses leadership with domination. He rejects titles and force but still becomes the central decision-maker. His humility hides power rather than eliminating it. The conspiracy theory says Canute understands this from their meeting at the farm. He laughs because Thorfinn believes he can escape the king's dilemma. Any community large enough to protect people must make decisions about danger, resources, and punishment. Thorfinn may travel beyond Canute's map, but he cannot travel beyond politics. A truly wild extension imagines that Canute allows, or indirectly supports, the Vinland expedition, because he wants to observe this experiment. Canute has reasons to remember Thorfinn. Their confrontation changes his policies. Thorfinn offers an alternative to royal power that Canute cannot pursue himself. If reports of the expedition reach the king, he might see it as useful research. Can a community survive without the structures Canute believes necessary? Perhaps merchants, sailors, or former Jomsvikings quietly report westward developments. Canute does not need to interfere, he only needs to wait. If Arnheid village succeeds, Canute learns that his own methods may be unnecessary. If it fails, his worldview is confirmed. Either result has political value. There is no evidence of royal spies in the settlement, and the distance makes regular reporting difficult. Still, former warriors and traders form networks across the North Atlantic. Information moves with ships. A king interested in expansion would pay attention to lands beyond Greenland. The most paranoid version says Ivar, or another militant settler, is unknowingly connected to interests that want the colony armed. Weapons create dependence on suppliers. Conflict opens opportunities for military leaders. A peaceful settlement has little value to men who profit from protection. Again, no hidden payment is necessary. Ideology can do the work of orders. Ivar sincerely believes a sword is essential. His beliefs happen to reproduce the world Canute governs. That may be the final lesson of conspiracy thinking in Vinland Saga. The most effective conspiracies are not always secret organizations. They are ideas that recruit people without introducing themselves. Honor recruits Thorfinn into Askeladd's band. Kingship recruits Canute into his father's methods. Property recruits Ketil into brutality. Protection recruits Ivar into escalation. Revenge recruits Hild, although she eventually refuses its final command. Each person believes they are choosing freely while moving inside a story inherited from others. We can now consider the theory that Thor's famous teaching was itself part of an older hidden tradition. Thor speaks of having no enemies and of the true warrior requiring no sword. These ideas seem radically out of place in his culture. Where did he learn them? The story suggests experience changed him, particularly the birth of Ylva and the emptiness of war. But some fans imagine that Thor's encountered a teacher during his years of campaigning, perhaps a monk, an enslaved scholar, a traveler from the east, or another deserter whose name was lost. According to this theory, Thors did not invent his philosophy. He inherited it from a secret chain of people who had rejected violence across generations. This hidden tradition would not be an organized society with symbols and meetings. It would be a lineage of encounters. A soldier spares a prisoner. The prisoner speaks of a different way to live. Years later, the soldier repeats those words to a child. The child carries them into another country. Thors gives the teaching to Thorfinn. Thorfinn gives it to Einar, Hild, Karli, and the settlers. Even when the colony fails, the sentence continues traveling. The conspiracy is that history remembers armies because armies build monuments, while the transmission of pace occurs invisibly between individuals. If such a lineage exists, Askeladd may have recognized it. His mother's stories of Artorius describe a leader who will return and save people from oppression. Willibald searches for true love beyond ordinary human discrimination. Thors rejects domination. These ideas come from different cultures but circle the same absence. Perhaps Vinland Saga secretly maps an underground history of people who understood the world differently but rarely controlled the record. Kings appear powerful because their decisions are documented, yet the idea that changes Thorfinn's life comes from a father speaking quietly on a ship. No law preserves it, no army enforces it. It survives because the child eventually becomes ready to understand. This theory transforms the apparent failure of Vinland. A colony can be abandoned. A phrase cannot be recalled once it enters enough minds. And so we reach the final conspiracy, the one large enough to contain all the others. What if the true subject of Vinland Saga is not Thorfinn at all? What if the protagonist is the idea of peace itself, moving from person to person and repeatedly changing form? It begins as something Thors can feel but cannot fully explain. In young Thorfinn, it survives as a buried memory beneath revenge. In Askeladd, it appears as admiration for a leader who refuses ordinary power. In Canute, it is transformed into the dangerous dream of paradise built by a king. In Einar, it becomes land free from slavery. In Hild, it becomes accountability without execution. In Gudrid, it becomes freedom to choose a life beyond assigned boundaries. In Cordelia, it becomes strength that does not demand fear. Among the LNU, it becomes the defense of a future against forces whose promises cannot contain their consequences. No single character owns the idea. Each misunderstands part of it. Each carries it farther. Under this theory, Thorfinn is important because he is the longest host, not because he reaches a final answer. His failures are necessary mutations. The idea learns through him that peace cannot depend only on distance, purity, or personal will. This would explain why the series refuses to end with uncomplicated victory. If Thorfinn built a permanent utopia, peace would become a solved problem belonging to one exceptional hero. By allowing failure, the story returns responsibility to everyone. The conspiracy theory says the audience is the next carrier. We receive Thor's words after watching what they cost. We are not expected to reproduce Thorfinn's exact rules on a distant shore. We are expected to notice the enemy making stories operating around us, the insult that demands retaliation, the fear that demands a weapon, the border that turns a neighbor into a threat, the comfort purchased through somebody else's invisibility. Perhaps this is why the wildest theories around Vinland Saga feel so natural. The story trains us to look beneath official explanations. Floki says duty but means control. Canute says paradise but uses conquest. Kettle says family but practices ownership. Settlers say defense but carry the seed of domination. Every noble word deserves examination. Conspiracy thinking becomes dangerous when it replaces evidence with certainty. But used carefully, it asks a valuable question: whose interests are served by the story we have been given? Was Thors killed to punish desertion or to clear a succession? Did Askeladd spare Thorfinn from amusement, guilt, or design? Did Sweyn abandon Canute or test him? Was Kettle's farm seized for money, control, or theater? Is Snake hiding from a kingdom a commander or himself? Did Hild delay revenge because she doubted Thorfinn or because she already hoped to forgive him? Did Leif describe Vinland or advertise it? Did the shaman see a fixed future, a symbolic warning, or the memory of descendants traveling backward through ritual? The honest answer is that several motives can be true at once. Floki can believe in discipline and desire control. Askeladd can exploit Thorfinn and care what he becomes. Canute can seek paradise and hunger for power. Thorfinn can be morally courageous and politically unprepared. Theories become most interesting when they do not erase contradiction but deepen it. Vinland Saga is filled with people who try to make one clean story from a complicated life. Young Thorfinn says everything will be resolved when Askeladd dies. Canute says enough power will let him defeat suffering. Ketil says his farm is peaceful because he is kind. The settlers say a sword will only be used for protection. Each story contains some truth. Each becomes dangerous when treated as the whole truth. Maybe that is the hidden conspiracy shared by every age. Human beings conspire with themselves to turn uncertainty into certainty. We prefer a villain because systems are difficult to fight. We prefer a hero because communities are difficult to build. We prefer destiny because accidents are frightening. We prefer a perfect Vinland because peace maintained one decision at a time sounds exhausting. Thorfinn's journey dismantles these comforts. He discovers that Askeladd's death does not restore him. Freedom does not erase guilt. Good intentions do not prevent harm. Refusing a sword does not remove fear. Reaching the promised land does not end history. Yet the story does not conclude that effort is meaningless. It suggests the opposite. If no destination guarantees goodness, then goodness must be practiced wherever people stand. If no leader can solve violence permanently, then ordinary choices matter more, not less. The wildest Vinland Saga conspiracy theory may therefore be the quietest one. Thorfinn never truly failed because permanent success was never available to anyone. He changed Einar and Einar changed him. He gave Hild enough evidence to choose forgiveness. He showed Canute a limit beyond royal power. He helped people imagine a community without slavery. He met another culture with an attempt at respect rather than automatic conquest. He made mistakes, caused consequences, and eventually chose lives over possession. None of this creates paradise, it creates precedence. A precedent is smaller than a kingdom, but it can outlive one. It tells the next person that another response has existed before. Thor's mercy becomes Thorfinn's memory. Thorfinn's restraint becomes Hild's evidence. Hild's forgiveness becomes proof that revenge can stop. The proof moves onward without banners. Perhaps the hidden network of Vinland Saga is made from these precedents. It has no king, fortress, or official name. Its members may never meet. They are connected only by moments in which someone refuses the role history prepared for them. Thors refuses to remain a Jomsviking. Askeladd refuses to let whales be sacrificed. Canute refuses to remain a frightened prince, although the path he chooses carries new dangers. Thorfinn refuses revenge, then slavery, then conquest. Gudrid refuses confinement. Hild refuses the final shot. Balder refuses to become a symbol. Cordelia refuses to let strength define her soul. Every refusal opens a narrow path. None keeps the path open forever. And maybe that is the answer hidden beneath all the theories. There was never one mastermind controlling the saga. There were only countless people inheriting plans from the dead, some obeying them and some changing them slightly. Floki inherits the Jomsvikings and tries to preserve control. Thorfinn inherits Thor's words and spends most of his life learning what they mean. Canute inherits a crown and discovers that using power without becoming its servant may be impossible. The LNU inherit their land and recognize that hospitality must be balanced against survival. Future generations inherit the consequences. History can look like conspiracy because every action arrives carrying motives from people no longer present. A sword forged years earlier changes a conversation. A story told beside a fire sends a child across an ocean. A father's death creates a warrior. A stranger's mercy later creates a pacifist. A field planted by former slaves becomes the model for a village. A vision of the future transforms fear in the present. Nothing is isolated. So when we ask whether Floki planned everything, whether Askeladd secretly raised Thorfinn, whether Leif sold a myth, or whether the shaman truly saw the future, we may be asking a larger question. How much of any life belongs to the person living it, and how much was arranged before they understood the board? Vinland Saga offers no simple release from that question. Thorfinn cannot choose his childhood, his father's death, or the lives he took before understanding their value. He can only choose what he does with the inheritance. That may be why his story remains powerful after the final page. He does not discover a magical place where the past disappears. He learns to carry the past without allowing it to issue every command. The conspiracy of violence is ancient, well-funded, and easy to join. It offers honor, safety, revenge, property, and certainty. The conspiracy of peace is quieter. It survives through people who often appear to lose. Thors dies, Arnheid dies, the farm is broken. The settlement cannot remain what its founders imagined, yet the idea continues moving. And if there is one theory worth believing after all the others have faded, perhaps it is this. Somewhere beyond the official histories of kings and battles, countless small Vinlands have existed for a meal, a season, a friendship, or a single decision not to strike. They were too brief to enter the sagas. They left no monuments, but for the people who lived inside them, they were real. That is the strange final secret of Vinland Saga. The promised land may never have been hidden across the ocean. It may have been hidden inside the moment's history considered too quiet to record.